All right. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. We'll hopefully see some more people come in as we go along, and get going. Yeah. Today's topic are connection references, something that we all probably have struggled with at one point or another, and keep struggling with. And we're getting stuff from between different environments, and we have to do this in a certain way, and there are things we need to take care of. And in my personal opinion, we couldn't get a better person to take us on this journey than Benedict Bergman, who has uh, loads of experience in this area. So I'll hand the reins over to you, Benny, and thank you very much for offering to do this session for us. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. I will share my screen.
Yes.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Good. So
Yes.
the next 30 minutes or so, depending on your questions and how my demos are working, we will talk about connection references and how we should how we should work with them, and some tips and tricks how to get them better to work for us. And we relate to the whole ALM topic as well, obviously, because that's the main reason why we have connection references. So first of all, a bit about myself. Benedikt Bergman is my name. I am the CEO at CRM Consultana in Germany. At the moment, still located in Sweden. So I am from Germany. I moved to Sweden 7 years ago, and working for CRM Consultana here in Sweden since 4 years now. And we will move back to Germany in 5 or 6 weeks. So it's very near, and there I will start up CRM Consultana in Germany, or I'm already doing that. I'm a .NET developer in the core, I would say. That's what I started with and what I did in the beginning of my career. Then I added a bit of Angular and React and so on, and then as maybe most of us I were thrown into a Dynamics 365 project. Back in the days, it was on-premise 2011, so CRM or sales. And I stuck to the platform, which we now call Power Platform. I have one customer which is on-premise still, which runs Dynamics 365 sales. The others are Power Platform. Most are only Power Platform. We have some which run Dynamics online, but most of them are Power Platform. Then I have my contact information on this slide as well. So if you want to get in touch after the session, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to help and try to help. You can also scan this QR code and will come to my bio link, where all the links to my blog and YouTube and Twitter and LinkedIn and so on. Yes, but enough about me. We will go into the topic. So the agenda for today will be connection references versus and connections. So I will explain the difference between those two and what's the idea behind it. And then we will talk a bit about how we should work with both of them. We will learn how to clean them up. And at the end, we will have some tips and tricks. Some of them might be, I might mention earlier as well, so then it will be a repetition of quite a few of those, probably. So we will see. And I have a demo or demos there in between somewhere. So first of all, connection references versus connections. So those are two completely different things, which get confused quite often. So we have on one hand, we have connection references. Those map connections to a flow or an app, basically. They are environment scoped and solution aware, which means I can move them from one environment to the other in a solution. And they do have an owner, but everyone in the environment can see all the environment connection references. Even so, there might be situations where we can't use them, which is the most the biggest problem we might have, and we will learn how to fix that. So they are in a solution. Everyone in the environment can see them if they have access to the Maker portal in the environment, and they don't really contain any information more than that's the connector I'm using and that's the connection, basically. They might have a status of turned off, or they will have a status of turned off, which is completely fine. We can't turn them on, and they always are shown as off. But that also sometimes confuses, because in flows we want to have them on, otherwise they don't run. So the thinking of many I talk to is, oh, the connection reference is turned off, so I have to turn it on before I can use them. That's not the case. They are just showing up at turned off, but they still work. Then on the other hand, the right side, we have connections. Those are not solution aware, and those are user scoped. So we they are scoped to user, and they can be shared, and that's in parentheses because not all connections can be shared. It depends on which connector you are using in this connection. For example, if you have a connection to a service, to an SQL, you can share the connection with other users. Whereas if you have something which is, for example, Dataverse, you're not able to share that with other named users. You can share every connection all the time with service principals, which is also what we need later for the ALM part. That's like an important information. Every connection can be shared with service principal, but they cannot be shared, or not every connection can be shared with other users. And that depends on mainly two things. One thing is that Microsoft has a switch per connector, whether or not they can activate, whether that's able to share or not internally, as I understood. And I don't know why they might not allow it, but I'm certain they have some reasons for that. And the other thing is there are certain authentication types like OAuth where you can't share. So it's forbidden from the OAuth like implementation to share the connection. It's scoped to the user that you're using there. And so depending on which authentication type your connector using, you might be able to share it or not. And connections do basically contain the credentials we want to use to connect to a certain service. So let's say we use Dataverse, so they might contain in the connection, we might have like the client ID and client secret and tenant ID to have a service principal connection to Dataverse. So that's the actual credentials. But since they are not solution aware, we can't move them to other environments. So we have to recreate those per environment. So that's the difference between connection references and connections. Okay. Then we have another slide here, which is the data model of those two, basically, to make it a bit more understandable. So in the middle, we have connection references here. They have a connection to connectors. Those can be either custom connectors or connectors which we have out of the box. So if you create a custom connector, they will show up. You can create a connection reference to it. So every connector can have one or more connection references which are like using this connector. They also have a connection mapped to it, and there every connection can be used in different connection references, but every connection reference can only have one connection, and they are actually using at a certain time. Then you also have like this connection down here where a connection is mapped to a certain connector, and every connector can have several connections. And then the last part is that flows and apps, so you could have apps here. Apps will use one or many connection references. They can be to the same connector or to different connectors. So that's basically the setup. And why Microsoft did that, they introduced it maybe 2 or 3 years ago or so, like the whole concept of connection references. The idea behind that is that before we had connection references, flows or apps were using connections directly. And since connections are not solution aware and we can't move them, every flow got lost its connection whenever we deployed it from test or from development to test and production. So what we had to do is after every deployment, we had to go into test or production or any other target environment and reconnect our flow to the connections we have in this environment, which also meant that we would create an unmanaged layer on top of the flow, which might mean that new changes of those flows were not taken effect because the unmanaged layer always wins above the managed solutions. So this, as you can see, that wasn't optimal. There were a lot of errors that could happen and a lot of manual work for every flow whenever we deployed it. And if you think about a scenario where you do deployments often, maybe once a week or every second week, so that's like middle often. But you have like 300, 400, 500 flows. That's a lot of manual work. Or you would script it somehow. So Microsoft came up with the idea of connection references, where we have something in between, and the flows only use those connection references, which will not change because changing the underlying connection, which is used in the connection reference, is not creating an unmanaged layer. So we can move them, and if they're configured correctly, and we will come to that, how to do that, or if our deployment is configured correctly, they will activate flows and apps, or apps will work, but flows will be activated automatically in test and production or any other downstream environment. So that's the idea, and that's the data model behind it. So how should we work with connection references then? Let's see. We have some points here. We should create those manually before we try to use it. This means if we let our flow create connection references automatically whenever we add a new step for a new connector, they will get weird names, and we will see that in the demo. So we should create them before we use them, so that we can also set our naming standard, and that's the second point. So we should have a naming standard in our project or in our company, so that the connection references are named in the same way, so that we know if I see a connection reference, I know what it's used for, and to which system it will connect and so on. I usually try to use connector name and then the area where it's used, and probably which user it should use. So there could be one which is like Dataverse, absence, and SPN. That would be it would connect to Dataverse. It would be for we have an internal absence app where we request vacation and so on. So the absence app, and then an SPN, which means I have to use a service principal name, or the intent is to use a service principal name connection in production. So that could be like a naming standard, for example. We should also make sure or try to have only one connection reference per connector. So the idea is, if I create my application, I want to have as few connection references as possible to make like maintaining my application easier and like the ALM process easier. So which also means for every connector, I want to have, in the best case, only one connection reference, which everyone is using in all the flows. There might be exceptions where I need different connections. This, for example, could be if I have an integration which should run under a certain user and another integration should run under a different user, then those need different connections because the connection defines the user that is used. And since we have different connections, we also need different connection references because every connection reference can only use one connection. So in that case, there might be that I have a certain amount of flows that use one connection reference and a certain amount of flows that use another connection reference. One example could be an integration. So for one customer, I have 3 or 4 connection references for Dataverse, because we have one which is like our general one, which uses also a service principal name to connect, and that's like internal stuff. So let's say someone is creating a contact, and then I want to calculate or do something like internal stuff. That's where we would use this SPN connection for. And the other 3 we have are different integrations. Like they have a system where they do all their billing and so on, obviously. So if they change something, I want to know where the change is coming from. So I have a certain like service user for that, and that is used in the connection, and therefore I need a new connection references. So there might be reasons to have different ones. But we should try to have as few as possible. So then the next one is we should use a service account. And there's two things in that, basically. One thing is we should use a service principal to connect to the service whenever it's possible. For example, for Dataverse, we can use a service principal to connect, which is not the named user, it doesn't have a license, it's like a non-authenticated or non-interactive user. That is recommended to use in the connection because we are not relying on one person. If we use a personal user in the connection to connect to a service, and this person leaves the company, the user gets inactivated and our flows stop to work. That's not what we want to have. So we should have a service principal in that, wherever it's possible. For example, when it comes to Teams or SharePoint, we can't use a service principal, so we have to use a named user. And there's that point coming in. In that case, it should be a service account. It should not be a named user like my user, personal user. It should be like a user which we use for this application, which connects to SharePoint or Teams or wherever I need it. That's one thing. So who should like which users should we use in the connection to connect to an environment or to our service? And the other one is who should own the connection, because those can be different. Those can be different users. I could create a connection which I own, but I'm using a service principal to connect to Dataverse, for example. So there's one part, which credentials do we use in the connection and which user is the owner. And a recommendation for test and production is that the owner of all connections should be a service account. And the idea behind that is that makes handling and managing of connections way easier. And to be honest, that's not how a perfect world should work. And that's maybe something where Microsoft should improve. But with the state of how we have the platform at the moment, it's a recommendation to have a service account. So the idea is, before I deploy my stuff from development to test or production, I log in with the service account, go into test and production, create all the connections that I would need, so that they are owned by the service account, share them with the service principal that I am using for my deployment, and then run my deployment, and everything should work basically if I have the settings file, which we come to in the next slide. So that's the idea, or that's the recommendation, and the idea behind that is one thing that it's better to maintain, because again, when I am like my personal account is owner of all the connections, and I am leaving either the project or the company, my user probably will be deactivated, which also means the connections I own will not work. They have a grace period like of 30 days or so, but at some point they will stop working and they will be deleted, which means if I am the owner of my connections in production, my production environment goes down, or at least all the flows and canvas apps won't work any longer, because I am owning the connections and they will be deleted or won't work or inactivated. That's one thing which we don't want to have. And the other thing is, since we can't share all the connections with users, it might be that I'm on vacation, but we have a production issue, but I am owning some of the connections, but my peers can't do anything about it because they can't see the connection, they can't change the connection, they can't activate flows that is using the connection, and so they would have the need to create new connections, change all the connection references to those, and then activate flows or make changes. So that's nothing we want to have either. So therefore, we have the recommendation to have service accounts. So all the people that take care of like test and production can log into the service account, and that might be different service accounts for those two environments, and they can handle all requests that are regarding connections. And then we have use settings files for pipelines. So the recommendation is that we should always use settings files when we have like our automated deployment through pipelines. And on the next slide, we will learn what that means. Then the last one here is the workaround. There is a workaround to create service principal connections and for Dataverse, and I will show you how that looks like. So let's go to the next slide when it wants to. Here it is, settings files. I have mentioned that a few times. When we run our deployments automatically through either Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions, we could specify a settings file. So whenever we execute an import, we can inject or also send in like a settings file. And in that, it would look like something like the one we see on the screenshot. It would have, it's a JSON file, it would have an array of environment variables and an array of connection references. And then we have like the schema name and value when it comes to environment variables, and the logical name, connection ID, and connector ID for connection references. So what we can do here is we create those for every of our solutions. Let's say we deploy 2 solutions, so we create 2 of them, which include all the environment variables and connection references we have in this solution. And then we can have one of those for test and one of those for production, which set different values depending on which environment I'm deploying to. And there I can then change like the behavior of my application depending on in which environment I am, as well as map the correct connection to my connection references. And so you see here, down here, we define the connection references. We have like the logical name as said here as an example. It's that's a bad naming example. It's generated automatically, and we will see that in a minute. And then we have the connection ID. So what we would have to do is we fill in the connection ID of our connection in like test. And then when we send that into our import step, what it will do is it relates the connection reference, which is called BEB, Shared Common Data Service for Apps and so on, with the connection we have configured here. So it will relate those two, which also means that the connection reference has a connection, an underlying connection, and the import step can activate all the flows that are using this connection reference. So we don't have to go into test or production and do this mapping ourselves and activate the flows ourselves. That's done automatically in our deployment. Important part here, again, is that the service principal we are using to execute our import step needs to have access to the connection. So we have to share it with this service principal. And there comes the important information from earlier. We can share all connections with service principals. So that's always possible, at least with service principals. And then in general, like how we, oh, I lost my cursor. There we are. So in general, how we want to work with connection references, and that's like maybe the most important slide of this session. There are usually some problems that connection references get created like randomly, and there is no, or it feels like there is no like rule to it, but there is. And the problem is that when I am changing an existing flow, I can always use the connection references that are already used in this flow, no problem. Whereas when I create a new flow, I can only use the connection references which have a connection which I have access to, if that makes sense. So let's say, sorry, let's go into that one here. So on the one side, we have a connection reference where we don't have access to the connection. And we can see that because we only see like a weird ID of the connection that is used in the connection reference. Whereas on the other side, here, it's the same connection reference, but this time there is a connection which I have access to. So I can see the name of the connection reference. So if I would try to create a new flow with this setup, it will automatically create a new connection reference for the same connector, but using one of my connections. Whereas when I create a new flow with that setup, it will use this connection reference instead. And that's how we get it to work, that we only use the connection references that we have, and we only have as few as possible, and we don't let the system create new ones for us, but on a random basis. So basically what we have to do is we have to make sure that a connection we have access to is configured to the connection reference we want to use. And that is whenever we want to create a new flow. So when I want to create a new flow, I have to go through like the connection reference I want to use, make sure that there are new my connections. If my colleague then like the next day wants to create a new flow, he has or she has to do the same. And the third day, I want to create a new flow again, I have to do it again. So we always have to make sure that all the connection references we want to use have a connection related we can access. Some of my customers do the workaround that they also use this service connection, not only to own the connections test and production, but also for creating every flows and so on in dev. Because then if we use a shared account to create flows, this shared account always has access to the underlying connections. So that's like taking away one of the problems, but usually we don't want to use shared accounts, and we only want to use them where that is really needed. So yeah, so that's but this is basically how we have to do that, and how to work with them. So let's dive into the demo and see how that really looks like. So let me open. So that's my environment, my demo environment, or one of my development environments. And here I'm in as myself. So that's my user. And I have a connection reference demo solution. And then I also have, so it's the same environment, but with a test user, one of our test users. So I open the same same solution, conref demo, and it contains a connection reference and a flow. So if I open the connection reference, you can see over here, it's a connection my own user has access to. If I open the same connection reference with the test user, you can see that it's only showing some weird ID, basically. So when the test user now creates a new flow, automation, instant flow, and demo 1, manually triggered, and then we add a new step for Dataverse, because that's the connection reference we had there. Maybe add a new row. So you see it's a sign-in screen that we see here. So now we immediately see it tries to create a new connection, which means it will create a new connection reference. And if I go here, it uses a CMK test connection or connection reference, which is a new one. And I don't even see the other one. So let me just save that account, and then we need that. Save. So when I now go back to the solution, we will have 2 connection references and 2 flows, and the connection reference will have a weird name. So we can see that immediately. And as you can see, it got like an auto-generated name, which is like our prefix of the solution. That's nice that it gets that. Then we have the name of the connector we have used, like the internal name from Microsoft. And then we have some random number or random string. Whereas the one up here I have created myself, where I have like the naming standard as we talked about, like the connector and where is it used. So that's I don't want to have, and as well also the display name that has like the display name of the connector, the name of the solution, and then the same random string at the end. So that's not nice. We don't want to have that. So if I now would go to my account again and open the same connection reference, that exactly, let me think. Yeah, I wanted to clean that up. That's the first thing I want to do. So to clean that up, for now, we will just delete the flow first, and then we will delete the connection reference, and we try it the other way. Delete. So what I have to do that won't happen is I will change before I create the flow, I change the connection to a connection I have access to, my users access to. And you have seen there are some of them, I have done that a few times. So now, if I open the connection reference, and now I'm the test user, I have access to the connection, as you can see here, because I see the name of the connection. Whereas if I go to my user and open the same one, we only see, now my personal user does not have access to the connection any longer. But what happens if the test user will create a flow now? Instant flow. I basically do exactly the same. I call it demo 2 though. And I add a new step to Dataverse, add a new row. And you see there was no login screen. I could directly go into the table and say demo 2. Let's check. It is using these connection references, which is called Dataverse demo CMK. That's the one we want to use. If I save, we should have 2 flows, 1 connection reference. And that's what we want to have. Go back. 2 flows, 1 connection reference. So that's the target, or that's what we want to have. If I do the same as my user, we will get another 2 flows. And we want to have that because I want to show you how to clean stuff up. Demo 3, probably. And then we basically do the same thing. Just and now you have seen that it has not created a new connection because it's my demo at dev environment where I test stuff. So there is some connection references which I have access to. So let's create a new one just for demo purposes. And here I could connect with service principal. So I could create a new one, which is like and I add the client ID, client secret, cancel the tenant to create a connection which is a service principal. But for now, I want to have it for my user probably. Yes. So account and demo 3. Save. So now we will have 3 flows, 2 connection references. Hopefully, when it refreshes. Yes, there we are. As you can see, automatic generated again, and 3 flows and 2 connection references. So, but now we know how we should work with them. We would have to go into the connection reference and change the connection before we create a new flow. So let's see. My user does not have access to this connection, which is used in demo 2. So what happens if I go to demo 2 and edit that? So remember, I don't have access to the connection that is used inside of this connection reference here. So I still can see that this connection reference is used. So it still uses the connection references where I don't have access to the underlying connection. But the difference is it does not show the name of the connection. So up here, you can see this little blue one, this little blue row. That's the connection that is used in the connection reference above. I don't have that down here. So that indicates that this is a connection reference where I don't have access to the underlying connection, but still I can use it. So, and that's because it is a flow that that was already present. I am editing a flow. I'm not creating a new one. Let me just delete the row again. And here you can see it still uses the same connection references where I don't have an access to the underlying connection. But since I edit the flow, I can do that. So that's fine. And that's mostly the confusion, because then that's when it happens sometimes that it creates new connection reference automatically, because it's only in certain scenarios, and it's not so easy to see maybe. Good. So let's go back to the slides and let's see. Next one is how do we clean that up now that we have a mess? The idea behind that is we have to identify the incorrect connection reference. Then we have to identify where this connection reference is used. We have to change to the correct connection reference in those places where the wrong connection reference is used. And then we can delete the wrong connection reference. So let me switch directly back. So what I have now is I have 2 connection references and 3 flows. And this one is I don't want to have. Okay. So let me see where it is used. We go to advanced on this connection reference, and then we show dependencies. So after a while, we get a list of places where it's used. In this case, it's only one flow. It's the demo 3 flow. So what we can do is we do an open, or we open that flow in our solution. That's up to you. And it opens the default solution. So don't use that, sorry. So I open the demo 3 directly here. And then we can press edit. And I forgot one step in between. So here you can see that we can't see the connection reference that we want to use. And that's because the connection which is connected to this connection reference is none that I have access to. So let's fix that first. So this one is the connection reference we want to use. And let's change it to one of our connections. Save. And open the flow again. Edit. So what I can do now is on all the steps in the flow where this connection reference is used, I have to click those 3 buttons and change to the correct one, which we are now seeing. So that's another thing, that since you have to do that per step of the flow, that might be a lot of manual work, depending on how much you're doing in your flow. So in best case, you want to have that right in the beginning. But now I have saved it. Let's go back. Let's check on the dependencies of this connection reference. There are no dependencies any longer. So now we can just delete it, and all of our 3 flows are now using this connection reference, which we want to have. So that's how we have like cleaned it up. Usually that won't be that easy, because as mentioned, there are several flows or apps that are using the wrongly created connection reference. There are several wrongly created connection references usually, and we have to do that for several steps in flows and so on. But in general, that's how you do it. So since we are nearly out of time, let's talk about tips and tricks. And some of those I have already mentioned, or most of them. Rename your connection references, or better know to create the connection reference in advance, and then you can set the name you want to have. Clean up your connection references every now and then, because it will happen that automatically generated connection references are created. That's not usually not to prevent, because it happens. Someone forgets to change underlying connection also. But you have to clean it up every now and then to make it easier for maintainability later on. Use as few connection references as possible. Same thing makes it easier to maintain. Because if you have, like, let's say you have 50 connection references to one connector, and all are using the same connection, and then you want to change the connection because this client secret went out, or I don't know, you have to change something, you have to recreate the connection, then you have to remap 50 connection references. Whereas if you have as few as possible, in that case, you might be okay with have one. You only have to do it in one place, which makes it a lot easier. Create your connections before deploying. So make sure that you go into test and production and create the correct connections with a service user, and share it with the service principal you are using in your pipelines, and update your settings file accordingly. Then wherever it's possible, use a service principal or service user as service principal in your connections, and then use a service user to own the connections in test and production. And one thing I wanted to show you as well is how do I get like the idea of the connection for the settings file. So if we go to the same environment to connections, and we choose one of the connections or the connections we want to use, we have to copy the ID from up here. No, sorry, there it is. So we have up here, first we have the environment or environments, then the ID of the current environment, connections, then the name of the connector, and then we have the ID of the connection. So what we have to do is we copy all of that, but not the /details. So we only copy like the actual ID. So we have the connector name, and then we have the connection ID, and then we have details. And what we want to have is like this here. Oh, sorry, this here in between. Now we can't see anything. That's what we have to copy into the settings file, basically. Good. Are there any questions?
Come on, people. Now's the chance. It's maybe not a question, but why is it important to create the connections and everything beforehand? Well, at least in my opinion, is the naming. How often have we been in a situation where we have something used as a connection called SharePoint 559-55639, some GUID, yari, and we have absolutely no idea where it comes from and what it is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but my main point to creating them beforehand is only with that I can configure the correct connection in my settings file,
Exactly.
which I need when I want to deploy.
Yeah, exactly. Just GUID, and unfortunately, Microsoft also throws GUID in our face in quite many error messages and warnings, etc., etc. Which basically doesn't tell us really much. So we should avoid having those at all in things that we are creating.
Yeah.
This is a really important topic, and probably most of us, if not all of us, I know me, you, Benny, and more others here have seen cases where companies have stuff in production that's in the default environment, and they are struggling to get things going again because an employee left the company 2 months ago, and now everything has stopped working and they can't process any bookings or repay customers because 50 flows aren't working correctly.
Yeah.
And it's just an absolute chaos, real-time chaos. And and this brings us back to basically the initial talking points we started today with, Microsoft almost overselling the simplicity of the Power Platform and being this self-service solution. Yeah, it is a self-service solution, but you have to self-service it correctly.
Yeah. And there's one question in the chat whether the creation of connections in Dev import can be scripted. In the PAC CLI, you can create connections and connection references for Dataverse. That's the one you can script. But the other ones I'm not aware of that you can.
Yeah.
Good. Perfect.
Right. To learn more about connection references and to learn more about the Application Lifecycle Management, order the smoking hot and new book that you will find the link here in the chat about ALM, and read it and learn it. I'm waiting for mine, and I just can't wait to dig in. All right, thank you very much, Benny, for this topic. Excellent.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. It was very, very insightful.
Yes,
perfect.
Definitely.
That's good.
Yeah, and good luck with your moving back to Germany.
Thank you.
Thank you. And best of luck starting CRM consultant in Germany.
Thank you. Perfect.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.